Okay, so today we're going to learn how to make whole small potatoes in the oven. So you're going to need a sheet pan, cutting board, and knife only for picking out the bad spots because these potatoes are going to be whole. Potatoes, salt, pepper, and olive oil. So I want to talk about the potatoes for a second. So you can use any kind of potatoes except for russets because the skin is so thick and you don't want it to peel it because it's just an extra step. So I have red potatoes and yellow potatoes here. Either is fine. You can use purple potatoes too. Any of them will work fine except for the russets. And then for the size of the potatoes, they can be anywhere from really small like this or to the biggest size about 2 or 3 inches across. Any bigger than this, they're not going to cook in the time as like the smaller potatoes. So you want to keep them in a similar size range so that they cook similar times. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to wash these potatoes. Okay, so when you've washed your potatoes, you're going to cut out any bad spots. And if there's no bad spots on them, you can put them on your pan. So to prepare our pan, we're going to put a thin layer of olive oil. I'm just going to show you. Just like this. Not too much, just enough to coat the potatoes when you toss them around so that they don't stick to the pan and they get crispy on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and pick off any eyes, which are these little things that stick out, and any bad spots off the potatoes, and then we'll throw them onto my prepared pan. Okay, so while you're cutting the bad spots off the potatoes, I just wanted to give an example of one. Something like this, cut in it, how it's black. That's a bad spot, or this little black spot is also bad, so you want to cut that off. It's important to do this, especially if you're immune compromised, because you don't want to get any diseases from the potatoes. Okay, I finished cutting the bad spots off my potatoes, and now I'm going to salt and pepper them. I'm just going to do a light layer of pepper and a light layer of salt. And then I'm just going to move them around a bit to spread out the salt and pepper. And I'm going to put these in my oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how big or small the potatoes are. So I'm going to start checking on them at about 45 minutes. So I'll come back in about 45 minutes and we'll see how they're doing.
So the first potato side we're going to learn how to make is roasted sweet potatoes in the oven. So these are really delicious, and the other best thing about these is if you want to make mashed sweet potatoes, you can just peel the skins off of this cooked sweet potatoes and mash them up, and they're super delicious that way also. So the first thing you're going to do is wash your sweet potatoes. Make sure you wash them really well because they've been in the ground. Then next, you're going to cut off the ends and any bad spots on them. So they'll look like this when the ends are cut off. You don't really need to cut off much, just a little bit. Then you're going to put them on a pan. You don't have to oil the pan or grease it or anything. You can just set them right on there. And then you're going to poke holes in them with a fork so that they can air out a little bit. And you don't need to poke that many. If you just take a fork, you can poke the fork into it 3 to 4 times, and that'll be good. And then you're going to put it in the oven and let them cook at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for about an hour. So it depends on the size of your sweet potatoes. These are really big, so you're going to want to go closer to more than an hour, but you can also get smaller ones and they'll take less time. But you really can't overdo sweet potatoes, and they're not very good when they're undercooked, so lean towards the higher amount of time and you'll be much happier. So you can always put them in really early and reheat them back up if you put them in too early. So after they've cooked for about an hour or longer, you're going to pull them out, and they'll have darker skins, and they'll also be squishy. So you're going to want to make sure they're squishy and they're soft, and you can poke a fork in one and see if you like how soft it is, and then that's it.
Today we are going to learn how to make mashed potato casserole. So for this, you need 1 bag of potatoes. So normally these are 3 pounds of potatoes. You need milk, you need sour cream, butter, salt, pepper, and you also need cheddar cheese. So the first step is to wash and cut the potatoes. So you want to wash the potatoes really well because the skin can carry a lot of stuff and it's really dirty. And if you're immune compromised, you have to be especially careful. So I'm using just red potatoes. If you're using russet potatoes, they have a thicker skin. You're going to want to peel them too because it's so thick. But you don't have to if you're not using russets. So I'm going to wash these really, really well, and then I'll get back to you. So after you've washed your potatoes, you're going to cut them and cut any bad spots off of them. So a bad spot would be like this little black spot on here. You don't want that on there because it's just dirty and isn't good to eat. So you're going to cut them about this big, just so they're not super large, but they don't have to be super small either. So if you're doing little tiny potatoes, you can just cut them in half and they'll be fine. So I'm going to cut off all the bad spots and then cut them all into pieces about this size. Okay, after you have washed and cut all of your potatoes, the next step is to boil them. So you're going to fill your pot with water until the potatoes are covered, and you are going to put the lid on and get the water boiling. And then you can boil them for about 20 minutes on about medium-high. But you want to start checking on them at about 15 minutes. Because all different sizes of potatoes and different kinds of potatoes are going to take different times to cook. And when a fork goes through the potatoes easily, then that's when they're done. Okay, so when the potatoes are done, and you should be able to stick a fork in them when they're done, and it should go in very easily. You can drain them. Be careful because it will be very hot because the water was just boiling. And then we are going to start making the actual mashed potatoes. So you're going to need milk, sour cream, butter, salt, and pepper, as well as the potatoes you just boiled. So we're going to add about half a cup of milk. About half a cup of sour cream. And about 1/4 cup of butter, which is about 4 tablespoons. You're also going to add half a teaspoon of salt and half a teaspoon of pepper. So the next thing to do is mash the potatoes. So I'm going to use a handheld electric mixer like this one. You can use something like that that's electric, or you can use a potato masher like this and do it by hand. Either way, you want to make sure you're not going to over mash your potatoes, because if you do that, they'll become like gluey and sticky and not have a great texture. So it's pretty unlikely you'll over mash it if you're using a potato masher or doing it by hand with a fork or something. But if you use an electric mixer, make sure that you stop before they're fully blended or mashed together. So you want them slightly clumpy. That's how you know it'll have a good texture still. So I'm going to mix these up and then we'll look at them after I do that. Okay, so I have mixed my mashed potatoes all the way. And if your mashed potatoes are too dry still, you might want to add some more milk because the half a cup of milk you started with when you put it in was just a baseline, and you might need more. So I'm going to add maybe a little bit more milk. And you can just add as much as you think you need to get the texture right. And then you could try them and maybe add more salt, pepper, whatever you want. So I'm going to mix these up just with the extra milk I just added, and then they'll be ready. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it looks like. So I didn't go too long because I didn't want them to get too sticky or too gluey. And as you can still see a couple small chunks. You can still see some of the skin, and that's all fine, but most of it is whipped up and fluffy. And so these are ready for mashed potatoes, but because we're making mashed potato casserole, we still have another step to do. So the next step is to put the mashed potatoes we just made into a casserole dish like this. And then you're going to cover it with about 1 cup of grated cheddar cheese. You can also use a 16-ounce bag of pre-grated cheese because that's easier. So I'm just going to sprinkle this on top. Just evenly spread it around. Okay, so now you have 2 options for cooking this. The first option is to put it in the fridge for a couple of days, like 3 days, and you can eat it a different day. If you're doing that, you need to cook it in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour when you're ready to eat it after it's been in the fridge. Because it's cold, it has to warm up and the cheese has to melt. If you're eating it now, right after you made the mashed potatoes and the mashed potatoes are hot, all you have to do is let the cheese melt. So you're going to put it in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 to 15 minutes until the cheese is all melted. And we'll come check back on it in about 10 minutes. Okay, so when the cheese is all melted, the casserole is done. And you can put other toppings on it, like chives, green onion, anything like that. You can put bacon, but it's not a good idea because bacon's really not good for you along with other cured meats. So you can just eat it like this and enjoy. Today we are going to learn how to make roasted Mexican potatoes. The first step is to scrub the potatoes really well. Potatoes can be really dirty, so it's important to wash them well. The next step is to cut off any bad spots on the potatoes. Then cut all the potatoes into small pieces. You want them very small, like small bite-sized pieces. Then lightly oil a pan and put the potatoes on it. Next, get out paprika, chili powder, cumin, salt, and pepper. Lightly sprinkle all of these spices on top. The paprika's for a little bit of color, salt and pepper for flavor, cumin for the Mexican flavor, and then the chili powder for flavor, and you really want to go light on this or you can skip it altogether. Then put them in the oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes so that they can roast and get a little bit crispy. When the potatoes are crispy on the outside but soft on the inside, the potatoes are done. Enjoy.